This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Mr. Bork, thank you for coming. We heard last week some testimony from the Home Builders Association that said they were following the new Natural Resources Canada Building Code. I'm just curious, in your experience, since your members are involved with sales of new homes and transactions, has your organization looked at how much the costs will be applied to each house for the changes to the building code that are proposed?
Yeah, we've looked into that whole issue. I could probably follow up with the exact costs that we would have come up with. But generally speaking, what we're concerned about is too many requirements being loaded onto a homeowner that they would have to incur those costs before selling, because then it's a disincentive to sell the home. So, for example, you have an older person living in a large house by themselves and they want to downsize, but then they're faced with the cost of having to do some kind of retrofit before the sale. That's a position we've taken for a long time, that we don't want that kind of regulation, because it will stagnate the market and prevent people from moving. And as Mr. Zafar pointed out, when you have movement in the housing spectrum, it frees up other units. So that's desirable.
Thank you. Do you mind, feel free to table that, any analysis or information you have
absolutely.
On that. So just so I understand, or for committee members, if someone wishes to sell a home that is, say, below a prescribed standard, their options are basically to incur the cost to retrofit that home before it's able to be sold. Is that basically your understanding of what's...
That's the concern. You don't want this being imposed before sale.
Right.
You know, it's great. It's important to have standards, and one of the benefits of building a lot of new product is that it's, of course, going to meet the highest standard. But the person selling should have the choice whether they sell it on a kind of as is or not, and they shouldn't be forced to have to do that upgrade before they sell it, because many of them couldn't afford to do that.
I assume what we could end up seeing is a lot of people actually just not selling the home.
That's exactly the point. That if they don't sell the home, then that's a real problem.
Right, which then just ties up inventory for longer if they have another option, but they can't sell, or they have to incur costs before they sell.
Yep.
It sounds to me like the government hasn't really thought this through.
Well, it's a struggle.
Thank you. Any information that you want to provide and follow up, we'd be greatly appreciated. Mr. Pomeroy, if I can, last question. You talked about the capacity to borrow and interest rates remaining low. When the Bank of Canada decided to purchase all of the debt issuance of the Government of Canada in an effort to keep interest rates low, what impact did that have on capacity to borrow and thus prices?
I think what we see in the data that 2020, 2021, 2022, we saw prices across the country on average going up 20% a year. So it had a profound effect.
So the decision by the Bank of Canada to participate in quantitative easing increased housing prices?
I think it did. I mean, that said, of course, there were many reasons why they did that. It's not, they're not just there to look after the housing market. And in fact, the governor of the Bank of Canada has said quite emphatically that it's not our job to look after the housing market, but it was there for sure.
We are in a wrecking ball in between, which is a housing crisis and then what is a competition crisis in Canada. We have a major competition problem. There was a competition Bureau report released this week that stated what we already knew. For the last 25 years, competition has never been worse in Canada. Canadians pay some of the highest fees in the world for cell phone bills, for groceries, for airlines, and for banking. And when it comes to banking, we have a highly consolidated industry and large oligopolies that control all the banking in Canada. At the same time, we have a competition reform problem and a policy problem. And that's evident because the federal government itself has just launched a bill, C-56, which addresses competition reform, and the same of a private member's bill by the leader of the NDP. There is a competition problem, and we have to address that. At the same time, we have a merger right now of Canada's number one bank, 23% market share in mortgages, trying to buy Canada's number 7th bank, which represent 800,000 mortgages, mostly in Vancouver and Toronto. And to give an indication of that, HSBC has 10% of all the Vancouver mortgages on the books and roughly 5% of Toronto's. So when we look at the difference between mortgages for a family in Vancouver and Toronto who had a $500,000 mortgage, and that's probably pretty low for most families, the variable mortgage rates today posted from HSBC are 6.4%, RBC 7.15%. That's a 75 basis point difference. And that didn't really matter 2 years ago during the pandemic. But when interest rates have risen, 75 basis points is a lot for any family. And to give that context for a family, that's going to be over $300 more just on that basis point difference per family on a $500,000 mortgage. And if you compared that to a family who right now is at 1.8 or 2% and has to refinance a mortgage, which now 70,000 families are doing that every month, you can imagine the pain that families would have in trying to make that relevant to their family budgets and their lives. And no wonder we're seeing a lot of families in all cities across Canada screaming that they just can't simply afford that. So when we look at this merger itself, certainly it is something where HSBC is a scrappy competitor who offers competitive rates in the market. But then we look at the fact that the Competition Bureau itself, in giving approval, stated that it's doing so under the current rules, that in competition reform, we have to change the Competition Act. And in doing so right now, what we're asking for is, during competition reform that the government started and all parties have agreed to look at, when we're looking at a housing crisis, and borrowing from Mayor Guthrie, who said this is the day of reckoning has come, we have to have an intervention by this government right now to ensure a scrappy competitor can stay in the market and offer lower mortgage prices for Canadians. Because if that competitor is removed, there's nothing that's going to be worse than having higher costs of mortgage fees and interest rates for consumers and Canadian families.
The Competition Bureau recently reported that the lack of competition in this country is worse than it's been at any time in the last quarter century, leading to higher prices for consumers and higher profits for corporate oligarchs across the board, and that competitive intensity is on the decline. Now after 8 long years, this Liberal government is considering allowing Canada's biggest bank to gobble up the 7th biggest bank to eliminate competition in an industry that already lacks sufficient competition and force up mortgage rates on Canadians who already can't afford to pay their bills. Today, I also searched mortgage rates for both HSBC and RBC. The 2-year fixed rate at HSBC was 40 basis points lower than RBC. The 5-year fixed rate at HSBC was 35 basis points lower than at the Royal Bank. Competition works. We need Canadian banks to compete for customers, not buy them. But if the biggest banks in Canada simply buy up growing players, there's no hope for there ever being more competition in Canadian banking. There are already too few financial institutions in the banking sector as it is. The Competition Bureau found that HSBC's mortgage business was a rate disruptor in the Canadian market. Removing this competition could raise banking fees when life is already unaffordable. If you have a smaller competitor pulling down rates, then we should want them to remain in place. Instead, this merger lets the biggest bank in Canada gobble up 800,000 customers without having to offer those customers anything for their business. And worse, when those new customers, who will then be Royal Bank of Canada customers, go to renew their mortgages, they'll be stuck with the higher Royal Bank of Canada rates that I mentioned. Mr. Chair, 70,000 mortgages are being renewed at higher rates every month in this country. As mortgage defaults creep up, people are starting to lose their homes. That's why competition to keep rates low as possible is so important, and why Conservatives are calling on this merger to be denied. We call on the Minister of Finance to deny this anti-competitive merger. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We have to put the capital into home building. I mean, housing is essential. But Canada is, of course, also in a capital crisis. Our manufacturing, our equipment is many cases in the we have the lowest renewal rate in the OECD for many capital purchases. Do you have any concerns with respect to the diversion of capital away from manufacturing and other areas of our economy? What impact that will have to our economy?
I'm not sure about that specific element of it. One of the things that's certain and that worries me is when you look at the construction sector as an industry, it is one of the very few, it might be the only sector of the economy that has had no productivity gains for decades. So that I think is one of the larger issues. It's a matter of technology. It's also a matter of occupational licensing that are driving up costs, causing delays, and making it so that we're not building any faster today than we were in 1970.
I don't know if we've heard that so far. We've had many great witnesses. So there's a lack of technological development in the construction industry that is holding us up, and it's I believe your testimony that we're not building homes any quicker than we were in 1970. Is that correct as well?
We are not. So if we go back to 1973, so 50 years ago today, we're building at the exact same pace, the exact same amount of units. Population has gone up by 78%. The pace at which we build has gone up by a whole 0%.
Wow. And one of the things that I think I've had the opportunity to ask a number of the panelists, and I put before any one of you who wish to answer, it would be great. So the CMHC came here before, and they told us that they warned this government in 2018 of an impending housing crisis. Have your institutions representative, has your city been aware of the impending crisis? Because I understand we are where we are right now, but I don't understand how in the last 8 years of this Liberal government we didn't take steps to solve it until now.
I think we've been looking at solutions that were targeting the demand side of the equation for way too long. It's about foreign investors, or it's about short-term rentals, and all of these things that exist at the margin but that are not core to the issue. The issue is on the supply side of the equation. You can do anything else. If you're not targeting supply, it's not going to work. This is not where the problem is. So I saw that there was an increase in the rate at which we're building of 8% in the past more. And I mean, that's fine, but there's 244 more percent to go if we're going to meet the CMHC targets.